Well, hello everyone. Happy Wednesday. It's Wes McDonald here, back for another episode of Level Up Live. And I just got back from a week of PTO, and I'm back with my good friend Kenneth Edmonds. How are you, Ken?
I am fine, though you can tell I'm not in my home office. I'm in a hotel room in Orlando. I'm only about 40 miles from home, but my wife's taking a class up here, and we're down to one vehicle right now, so it was just easier to stay up here rather than try to ferry her around.
I love it, and certainly it's a testament to a lot of the remote stuff that we're so capable of doing now, really. And I love it that the internet bandwidth in most places that you travel to now still allows us to kind of do this kind of stuff. But you're no stranger to it. You'll do it from a cruise ship.
I will do it from a cruise ship, though that becomes a little spotty depending on whether or not they've upgraded to Starlink. Those that have upgraded to Starlink, and if the water's reasonably calm, you can have a great connection. If they're not on Starlink, it becomes iffy whether it'll work or not.
Well, that's great. And for everyone out there that's joining us, either from your home office, your hotel, on some ship somewhere, and sometimes even these days, Ken, even on planes, right? That I've seen people watching content now on airplanes, which is really cool, right?
Absolutely.
And now your favorite thing. So you told us that you're in Orlando, 40 minutes from home, joining from the show. And for everyone else out there, remember, we love to hear where you're watching from. And Ken, we've had a lot of guests from all kinds of different places. What are some of those places?
Well, we've had people come in from, Scandinavia, the UAE, several places in Europe, France in particular. I remember we've
Australia,
had Canada, U.S., so all over.
And of course, every week we have someone from Canada. So
yeah. Well, that's just because you pay your mom.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And Mom, if you're out there watching, I love you and thanks for joining in for another episode. And also, while you're busy telling us where you're from, don't forget, leave your comments and questions. We love to hear what you're thinking, especially as we bring on such a unique and inspired guest every week with different sets of expertise to help you to grow your business, to level up your business. So make sure you leave those comments and questions there. And Ken, without further ado, maybe you can introduce our guest and let our audience know what they'll be learning today.
Well, our guest is Bob Dilenschneider, and he is a business expert. We're going to talk about three things out of a recent book. Well, he's going to tell us about the book in just a second. But we're going to talk about how to use social media, the right way to make decisions, and how to become a memorable manager. All of those things are critical if you want to advance your career and help your company.
Agreed.
So, Bob, you want to tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from?
I was born in New York. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I attended Notre Dame. I was graduated from Notre Dame. Great school, by the way. They're playing the Navy in Dublin, Ireland this weekend. We're giving 6.5 points if anybody's interested. And then I was home one day, and my dad ran the local newspaper, Columbus Citizen. And we're having lunch. He never came home for lunch. And we're having lunch, and he slid across the table a Trailways bus ticket from Columbus to New York. And I said, Dad, what's that? And he said, you got to go to New York to make your living.
Yeah.
And I said, but what do I do there? He said, you'll figure it out. So I took the bus to New York, got out of the Port Authority, which is where the buses come in, and started to figure out what to do. I met a man named David Merrick, who was a big-time producer on Broadway. And after about 10 minutes, Merrick said, son, you should not be on Broadway.
So what's the acting career?
Well, I eventually went into the public relations business and have been in it for decades and work with clients around the world. It's very rewarding. I've been in my own company. And by the way, I'd recommend that for anybody watching the show. Start your own company. It's really very, very interesting. It tests yourself. Frankly, you can make more money. You can do what you want to do, make decisions you want to make. It's a big difference from working in a huge organization. I don't want to put those big organizations down, but being in your own company, doing something for yourself, it makes a great difference.
Yeah, I completely agree. And obviously, all three of us on this call do have our own companies. Ken has his own. I have my own as well. And certainly it does give you a unique perspective on what you're capable of doing in the world, right? You've certainly done a lot of, things. And maybe one of the things that we can, start with is one of the things that we're using right now, right? So that this is being broadcast on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube live. It'll be there forever afterwards. People get a chance to view it afterwards. So why don't you give a little perspective on sort of your take on and background on how to use social media?
It's a great question because social media permeates virtually everything we do today. You can't pick up a newspaper, although that's not social media. You can't watch television. Occasionally that is social media, without social media being important. But here are the keys to social media. There are really two keys. Number one, if you're going to use social media, think about who's going to make the decision on what's important to you. Might only be one person. You don't have to use social media to reach one person. You have to use other means. But generally, in all kinds of media, including social media, if you reach out to thousands, it might not make any difference in the world. Think about who's going to actually do something that is going to be helpful to you. That's extremely important. It is something most people don't do. So think about who's going to make a difference for you. That's number one. Number two is social media is exciting. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of ways to access social media. But the problem is really figuring out what you want to say. What's the message? It doesn't make any difference if you're using old-time media or social media. If you don't have a message, forget about it. So using a message and communicating that message through social media is very important. So those two steps before you do social media or anything else are very important. Number one, figure out who's going to make decisions that are important to you. And number two, determine what your message is going to be so that people relate to it. If you don't determine your message, you're going to be in trouble. You'll be all over the place. And you might step away from social media and say, well, I did that. But if you didn't communicate a message, that's not going to really work. So
yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to talk about both of your points a little bit. But there was a song by a guy named Nilsson. It was called "The Point," and one of the lines in that song has stuck with me forever. It said, "A point in every direction is no point at all," and that's what we see with so many people. Their message is so mixed and so broad that there's no meat to it.
I think to your viewers, to your listeners, they should sit down with their wife or their husband at a table and say, look, what do we want to achieve here? What's one thing we want to do? And let's actually write it down on a piece of paper, an English sentence. Write it down on a piece of paper. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people can't do it. But if you can do it, it'll determine what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how much money you're going to put toward it, how much time you're going to spend. It's a very useful exercise.
I think so. And I think even before that, so now I'm going to go back to your first point about who are you talking to? And I do a lot on social media. And one of the things that I hear over and over in the trainings I take is that who is your ideal customer? Who is your, they'll say your avatar. You think about what is this person, and you really kind of build them out as who they are, what they're interested in, what are they doing, so that once you know who that is, then you can figure out what is it they want, what do they need to know, what do I have that's of value to them, and then that gives you a framework for your message.
Absolutely, and if you can figure out who your audience is, I'm going to have lunch today with two people. One of them wants to run for mayor of New York City. Well, I'm going to have to tell this person it's a big walk up the hill, but here are the people you need to reach if you want to get the nomination and run for mayor. Here's how you do it. So, again, for this person to reach out to dozens, hundreds, thousands of other people means nothing. If they don't get the nomination, it doesn't make any difference at all. So they've got to get the nomination. That's the key.
Yeah, and I'm going to touch on one other thing, because knowing who your ideal customer is, or the person that you're trying to communicate with, also might be determinant in figuring out which platform you're going to spend your the majority of your effort, I spend time on a lot of platforms, but really YouTube and LinkedIn are probably my two biggest platforms because in both cases of business, that's where my audience is, and that's the way they like to consume their information. Some people like it written, but a lot of times visuals are so powerful. In my other occupation, I do disabled travel. We do videos of my wife in a wheelchair going around inside accessible bathrooms. I probably have more bathroom videos on the internet than anybody, but it's what my audience needed to know. And and the visual perception of seeing that and seeing her operate in it conveys the message. So again, you think about when you're trying to talk to your audience, how are they going to want to consume it?
Your audience is very important, and it's very unique. Again, let's say you can figure out who the decision maker is in your audience. One person, two people, five people, generally not many people. Let's figure out what motivates them. What do they spend time watching, listening to, doing? Makes a big difference. This weekend, Notre Dame, my alma mater, is going to play the Navy, the Naval Academy in Dublin, Ireland. Well, there are certain decisions that have to be made with respect to that game. Do you want to be one of 70,000 people attending? I don't think so. But if you want to be you want to be the coach, you want to be a player that goes in, you have to convince the coach that you've got the ability to do it. With all respect, you can be a great teammate, but forget about the other players. What are you going to do to make sure the coach knows you're the best? So that's really the key to the whole thing. Oftentimes, people talk about decision makers. Most of the time, they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, another question that somebody that I remember seeing, and I love this one too. It says, "What is it that keeps your target client up at night? What are they worrying about? Because that's the problem they need help with. And if you can solve that for them, you become pretty important to them."
I'll take your iPad if you have one today, and put the individual's name into it. Look very carefully at what is said about the individual. It will give you clues on what else to Google up. Google those other things up, you'll find out a lot of information. Once you have that information, you'll be able then to use social media or maybe even a letter that gets through. The art of sending a letter is a lost art. Very few people do it these days. But I found sending a letter makes a huge difference. People are shocked when they receive a letter. They open it up, they read it, they say, "Hey, this guy sent a letter. That's really interesting." Well, that's a way to get through. There are many other ways to get through. Reaching out to somebody in terms of where they live, in terms of their family, in terms of their pets. It's amazing. We had a fellow that loved dogs, and we found out the best way to communicate with this man was to talk about dogs and what they did. Well, the minute we opened the can and started talking about dogs, this guy loved it. And all of a sudden, we were into a discussion about dogs that led to him making a decision that was very helpful to me and my clients.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, yeah. So let's go to our next question, because this is an interesting one, because you postulate that there is a right way to make mistakes. So
everybody is going to make a mistake. Anybody who says, "I don't make a mistake," look in the mirror. Everybody makes mistakes every day. The right way to make the mistake is to learn from your lessons. Once you've made a mistake, don't slam your fist down on the table and say, "I blew that one." Say, what led up to this mistake? Why did it occur? How did it occur? What could I have done differently? How does that give me another way to get back at the problem or the opportunity that I'm talking to? So, yes, you make mistakes. Analyzing that mistake is extremely important. So don't think you're going to get through the day without making a mistake. It's not going to happen. But when you do make it, and you know it's important, then think about all the other elements about the mistake, and you'll figure out a lot of things that'll be very helpful to you. Knowledge of the mistake and what it means is very, very important. This morning, I played a game of backgammon with my wife. She was winning. unfortunately, she had to go to an appointment. So we had to suspend the game. A mistake on her part. She should have given more time at the beginning. She would have won the game. Now we suspended the game, and it's never going to be rejoined by me because I know I'd be a loser. So knowing what those mistakes are is very, very important. I made a mistake this morning. I wanted to have some eggs for breakfast. I looked in the calorie counter. I don't want to offend anybody on this call. And I said, having eggs like this, laced with butter and with ingredients, doesn't make any sense. So I said, what do you think I should have? A rice cake. I had a rice cake. Pretty good. And I had a good reaction to it. But I would have made a mistake had I had the eggs. Those are really very basic things. There are bigger things where you can make a mistake. You can take the wrong job. That's a huge mistake because getting out of that job is not easy. So before you take a job, analyze all the things that could happen to you and all the things you could do. Anybody at any job anywhere in the United States, I don't care if it's the biggest or the smallest company, and forgive me, I know that you're from Canada, in the world, anybody can make a mistake in a job. And when you do, just assume it's going to happen and think to yourself, not how can I cover it up? How can I avoid this? How can I learn from it? That's what you have to do.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the mistake with the eggs because for our audience, what I actually had for my late breakfast today was eggs, not a rice cake.
Yeah. And I'm going to share a story because it fits into what you just said. I made the mistake of interviewing for a job on a weekend. A company flew me out to California, wanted me to go to work for them. I went in on a weekend and interviewed. It seemed like a great opportunity. And there were a couple of things that I should have noticed in this process too. Is when I negotiated the offer, the compensation package they agreed to should have told me that they weren't very smart because I was going to get a percentage of the profit in the service department, which is where all the revenue in our industry comes from. And it was a substantial. If they'd let me run that department and make it really successful and hadn't been complete idiots, I would have been a very rich man by now because they were paying me way more than they should have agreed to. So that should have been a red flag. But I interviewed on the weekend, and you don't get any sense of a company. So I took the job. The first day I showed up to work, I realized those people, when they were there with employees, left their brains outside, and they turned into absolute idiots. And I'd be stark raving idiots. And took me a year and a half to get out of the job, as you said.
Great example. I will give you two other examples. One of the first assignments I had was with a company called Marathon Oil. Marathon Oil is one of the great oil companies of our time. They have real pros there. Well, a man named Bill Ryder came over to see me. Bill Ryder was in charge of the press and the public relations for Marathon, and he sat over next to me at my table and he said, I'm going to teach you some things. You and I are going to learn together. And we did. There was nothing negative. He literally taught me at every turn. It was a wonderful experience. There was another experience I had with a company I won't name, with a guy named George. And George said, you're after my job. You're not going to get it. And here's why you're not going to get it. And just assume you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. And frankly, he didn't say this, but he meant it. I will call those mistakes to our boss's attention, and you're going to lose your job. That's what he told me, because I want to advance in my job. Not a bad idea. Not a good idea. There's another example. I might use it. It's people raising money. I think sure many people on this phone call, this telecast, want to raise money. There's a real art to it. When you want to raise money, figure out who you want to raise it with. Do people have the money to part with? What motivates them? Oftentimes, why you want to raise money is not as important to the people that want to give you money as their own pet cause. So understand what it is, figure out these things from A to Z. It'll make a huge difference in terms of your life. Don't just drive up to somebody and assume they've got money and you're going to get it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It was interesting. I tried raising money at one point in time from a company I owned. And when I went to the bank, they said, well, if you'd come here a couple of months ago while you still had a job, we'd loaned you all the money you want. But now you need the money, and we're not going to loan it to you.
Right.
Yeah, I can tell you one of the things that I've learned, about making mistakes in my career is the ones that I don't regret are the mistakes that I've made when I've extended myself or when I've tried to push outside of my own comfort zones, right? And maybe you can speak to that a little bit, right? Because I think people call them failures, they call them mistakes. But, is there something to that? Should we be trying to stretch ourselves outside of the areas that we know that we're good at? And
there's nothing more exciting, nothing better than getting to the edge of the cliff and saying, well, I'm going to jump off. And when you jump off, you have to set it in advance, and here's how I'm going to land. So you need to make sure when you jump off the cliff, you're going to land in a soft spot. Very, very important. But I think everybody, when they drive up to a situation, needs to say to themselves, what happens to me? How do I want to get out of this? What's the best situation for me? And if it goes south but goes badly, figure out how to end it. I have a brother-in-law named Court Dowdy, who's a lawyer. And Court's a brilliant guy, and he always says, when you make a deal, always have a way to get out. It's very important. And so every deal I've ever made, whether it's a legal deal or anything else, I say to myself, if I've got to get out, this is what I'm going to do. Most deals I never have to get out. But occasionally when I do, Court Dowdy's name comes to mind.
Yeah, it's good to have those people to help you through those, through those mistakes, right? And while we're here, I do want to drive people to make sure that they can find out where to get your latest book, The Ultimate Guide to Power and Influence. And maybe you can just take a couple of seconds before we move on to the final point to talk about your new book.
Thank you. I wrote The Guide to Power and Influence about 40 years ago. And my publisher came to me about 4 or 5 months ago and said, an awful lot's happened since this first book, which was a bestseller, by the way. And he said, why don't you update the book? So I did. It's The Ultimate Guide to Power and Influence right now. It was on the bestseller list for 2 weeks, one with the Wall Street Journal and 2 with USA Today. So I was happy about that. But if you read the book, you'll find, I think, ways to guide your own life and career and ways to help other people and ways to help yourself. It'll offer you very practical things to do, from how to write an English sentence, something most people don't really have a clue to. But if you can figure that out, it makes a big difference. Kirkus Reviews, you'll see on the screen, gave me a very nice review. I had a good review in the Wall Street Journal. Unfortunately, the man who was going to review my book in a more complete way in the Wall Street Journal passed away. So now I've got to go. That's very sad for him. Sad for me too. But the book is done very well. I'm optimistic. People that get it say that they benefit from it because they learn what to do, and that makes a big difference. So The Ultimate Guide to Power and Influence has helped a lot of people.
Well, that's great. And I did put the show that it's obviously easy available through lots of outlets, including Amazon, so that the viewers can, check it out there. And looks like just a few other comments just to bring our people in. Greg Walters joining us from Michigan. So, Greg, thank you very much for that. And nice to see Fazia joining us as well. And Greg Gumpright, we already got to earlier, but from the beautiful Garden State of New Jersey. So a big shout out to those that have, that have tuned in today. Listen, in respect for your time and that of our audience, we keep these to half-hour sessions. Maybe let's talk about this because it's something else that you have a lot of experience with but how do you become a more memorable manager? Because sometimes the managers that I remember aren't necessarily good ones. There are stories about people you never like to work for. But what about these positive, memorable managers? How do you become one of those?
Very important, because if you're not a memorable manager, you're not going to go anywhere. Somebody needs to see you and say, George did this, Sally did this, I'm a memorable manager, let's advance them. Very important. So how do you become a memorable manager? Well, the key is to saying, what's the objective of the organization or the people that I'm dealing with? And how can I help achieve that objective? That if you can do that and you can achieve it, then you'll become memorable in that person's life. So with a decision maker, if you can figure out what meaning is meaningful to that person and address it, that's going to make a big difference in terms of you being a memorable manager. You don't have to do a lot of bizarre and off the wall things to become a memorable manager, just not necessary. What you have to do are focus things that come really to the ken of the people that you want to have do something for you. If you can do that, it'll make a big difference. This afternoon, I'm going to talk with a man who urgently wants me to help him raise money. I will try to do that, but I'm only going to do it if he fulfills for me certain things. If he does that, and I raise the money, and I can do it, I'll become a memorable manager in his eyes. But it's very important to do. Oftentimes, doing things that make you a memorable manager, it doesn't mean a lot to you. It's got to mean a lot to the people you're dealing with. That's the key to the ticket.
Yeah, I love that. So it's very human centered on the on the people that you're working with, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Make sure that we're actually looking at them as people. And I think, when I'm looking back on memorable experiences I've had with managers, they are the ones that, whether they knew it or not, really took the time to help me achieve my objectives, right? That it wasn't me just trying to help them with their, managerial objectives for whatever department they were leading, but that they, really worked hard to make sure I could achieve mine. Because in the end, everybody wins if we do that, right?
That's right, exactly. Well, I really believe that everybody that's involved in this program should say to themselves, how can I help the people I'm dealing with? If you do that, they'll recognize it and they'll help you. And that's 1 + 1 = 3. And that's the way to go.
Yeah, I like to call that service-led leadership, right? That when we're actually in service to others, that how much more of it comes back, right? That it's actually, in the news lately, we've been talking about nuclear fusion finally becoming a viable energy source, that they're finally getting more power, out of what they put into it, right? And I think that's the key, that whenever we put something, into somebody else in the act of service, we do get more back than we've ever given, right? Is that fair?
It's absolutely, and it's amazing. You talk about nuclear. Last night I had dinner with a man named Seth Gray, who probably knows more about nuclear than anybody I've ever met. Oh. Well, we talked about our lives in the beginning, 30, 40 years ago. Nuclear was not high on the list. It was something we should all be scared of.
Yeah.
We should not do anything on nuclear power. Today, everybody's trying to figure out how to access nuclear power. So a major change has gone on in life. And it's worth studying how that change was made and how it came to be. So there were a lot of people in Shippingport, Pennsylvania, and other parts of the world who said, nuclear power is the worst. It's going to kill us all. Well, it didn't, it hasn't, and it won't. So the key is figuring out how to make that happen.
Yeah, like anything in life, right? That anything that yields great power has the potential to have obviously some pretty detrimental, impacts, right? But wielded correctly, obviously, that power can do enormous good, right? So,
well, absolutely. I mean, Joe Biden and Donald Trump could be. I don't think either one is going to be the next president of the United States. I think somebody else will take that job. With respect to Mr. Trudeau in Canada, who knows? I mean, anything could happen. So,
yeah, it's funny. I think that, it's different because in Canada, there's actually no term limits, right? So I know that his dad had quite a few. I'm not sure he'll get quite as many. And just going to direct everyone back to your book. So you can get onto Amazon, look for The Ultimate Guide to Power and Influence, everything you need to know. And listen, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today and sharing your expertise with our viewers.
This is a wonderful program. It's got a great reputation. And people watching it should say to themselves, I spent a good 20 or 30 minutes learning something.
Well, I really appreciate that. And of course, to all of our viewers, those that join us on a weekly basis or once a month, how often you can visit us, we want to thank you. And Ken, as I always like to remind people, until next time, keep learning.
And keep leveling up.
Sounds good. Thank you both very much.
Oh, thank you so very much for sharing your expertise and time, Bob.
Take care. Okay.